What if being a follower of Jesus isn't all about staying clean and spotless? What if it also involves getting our hands dirty? What if it's time to stop watching from the sidelines and time to get stuck in?
Morning. How you doing? My name's Joel. It's good to be together. I don't know how you feel about things, but I'm just going to be really honest with you and just share something with you. I don't know how you feel when you get told to do something. You know, now if I'm sort of lost and I need directions and I pull over and ask somebody, where's such and such, and they tell me where to go, I don't mind those kind of directions. When I was doing sports or music, I didn't mind my coach or tutor saying, try it this way or play it this way. I didn't mind those types of instructions. I don't mind being told what to do in those situations. However, my absolute favorite, the one I just love, is when my employer used to tell me this is what you should do and this is how you need to do it. I just love that. I don't know about you, but even better than that, if you're in a relationship with somebody, don't you love it when they tell you? Don't you just love it when they point something out to you that you should change and you haven't even really thought about it? Or maybe you just, it just makes me feel so good inside. I just love being told what to do. And, I don't want to give you any examples of the things I get told to stop doing and to change or to start doing because it tarnishes your wonderful reputation of me, your great perception of me of being so perfect that no one ever tells me what to do. Anyway, don't you just love it? And if I'm really honest, sometimes you get instructions that you didn't ask for. Does that ever happen? You're just going about your normal business and you're kind of thinking, hang on, I have done this thing my entire life. And now you're telling me that I should stop doing it because it annoys you when I roll my eyes? Oh, I just said it. You're just like, oh, man. and sometimes you get told to change something. You didn't ask for their input. And if we're really honest, it's actually a little bit offensive. Because it's like, what are you telling me for? If we're in the middle of a series called Get Stuck In, and it's all about this idea that to be a follower of Jesus isn't tidy and it isn't supposed to be clean and it isn't supposed to be passive. Actually, as a follower of Jesus, there's these times when we are called to get stuck in. And the story we're looking at today, which is wrapping up our series, if you've missed any, you can catch them online. But the story we're looking at today is a moment when Jesus told somebody to do something, and they didn't really ask for it, and they didn't really want his input. So, yeah. Anyway, this story, I just have to give you a little bit of context, a little bit of explanation. So when we have this book called the Bible, which is a whole bunch of different books put together into one book, there's 4 books in this book called the Bible. It's like a library, really. And of the 4 books in the Bible, there's 4 that are kind of thought of as biographies. We've talked about this before, haven't we? So they're Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because people were so clever about what you call the names of books, they just named them after the people that wrote them, right? So you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are these 4 biographies. And they're eyewitness accounts. These are people's experiences that they had with the time of Jesus, and they wrote these books, and they wrote them together. And the book we're going to look at today is found in Luke. Now, Luke is totally different than the others. Luke is really, really unique in the way that he approached his biography about the life of Jesus. See, Luke wasn't one of the guys, Matthew, Mark, and John were. Luke wasn't one of the guys that was there with Jesus at the time these things took place. So he wasn't there like John and Matthew and Mark were eyewitnesses writing down what they saw. Now, Luke also wrote the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, he also writes about the things that he saw because he was there. But in the book of Luke, he doesn't write about the things that he saw because he was not there. So Luke has a little bit of a different start. And he says this at the beginning of his book. He actually tells us what he's doing, which is so unique. And it says this in Luke 1. It says, many have compiled a narrative. So people have written about these experiences. Many have compiled a narrative that have been accomplished among us, like those who were the first eyewitnesses, Matthew, Mark, John, and others. They were the first eyewitnesses, and they were entrusted to the things that they saw, and they passed on the message of the stuff that they saw. And Luke says, I have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, and I've recorded it so that you may know what you believe is true. So see, Luke's more like an investigative journalist. See, Luke is the only book that actually writes about the birth of Jesus. Because he just told us, I'm going to go back to the very beginning, I'm going to investigate it, I'm going to research it, I'm going to find out what's going on, what took place, and I'm going to write about it from that. He's written his book to a guy named Theophilus. So if anybody, if anyone in your family, if anybody of your colleagues, anybody expecting a child and you're sort of wondering what you should call it, there you go, Theophilus. So not only do we want to help you at New Life Church, we want to also help you name your children. So there you go, Theophilus. That'll be a really good one when they go to school, right? So Luke, this is who he's writing to. So it's Theophilus, so that you may know, Theophilus, what you believe is true. So he's actually written his book for a particular person. So he's actually done all this research. And Luke's book is really, really cool. Now, he writes more details about Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection than the other three books. He writes more details, more specific details. And Luke wants to inspire people that what you're reading, that you can know for certain that what you believe is actually true. Luke tells us at the very beginning what he's writing for, which is pretty cool. And it helps people like us who also, like Luke, were not eyewitnesses at the time. So it's pretty cool. Now, the other thing that Luke does, Luke, in his whole book, he has more stories and more examples of when Jesus encountered the outcasts of society. So there was like widows, there was beggars, there was people that were the fringes of society, women, tax collectors, the people that were on the outskirts of the cultural system. Luke writes the most about those experiences. He somehow records more and more everyday encounters. And the other thing he does, which is really cool, he almost always quotes his source. Because he's an investigative journalist, making sure that everything I write down is true. For example, he records a story about a guy named Zacchaeus. You might have heard about him. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed into the sycamore tree. Anyway, there you go. There's even a kid song about it. He says, Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector in Jericho. So if you're a journalist, you know that you need to quote your sources, don't you? You don't just say, there was this guy that climbed up a tree and met Jesus. See, Luke doesn't do any of that. In Luke's book, he always quotes the person, the occupation, and the place they lived. Because when it was written, you could wander down to Jericho and you could say, hey, I'm looking for that guy Zacchaeus. I heard he's a bit on the short side, but I also heard he had an amazing experience with Jesus. I want to check out that what I'm reading is true. Luke quotes his sources in a way that nobody else does. Luke quotes more women as Jesus followers. For example, Joanna, servant in Herod's court, follower of Jesus. He gives you her name, tells you what she's doing, where her occupation is, and you could verify it because you could find out, okay, who are these people? I'm looking for someone named Joanna. She's listed as being there when Jesus came back from the dead. They went down to the tomb. She works here at Herod's court. I want to go see her. I want to speak to her. Luke's saying, don't just take my word for it. See, Luke is writing in a way that is telling everybody, these are my sources. So this is just some context for the story we're going to look at today, because it goes into detail, which is pretty cool. It goes into loads of everyday, ordinary moments, so much more than any of their book. And it's really cool. And the other thing about Luke's gospel He's less focused on like all of the great teachings and the miracles of Jesus. Although they're in there, he seems to be less focused because he has a more balanced whole view approach where he talks about Jesus in everyday, ordinary terms, chatting to everyday, ordinary people. He has more of those types of experiences. And the other thing that Luke does, which we're going to look at today, right in the middle of his book, it's kind of like chapters 9 through 19, 10 chapters of his book, include stuff that is not included in Matthew, Mark, and John. And it's known as the travel narrative. Guess why it's called the travel narrative? Because it's what took place when they were traveling. Pretty clever, huh? I wish I had thought of that, right? The travel narrative. And he has 10 chapters of experiences and stories that Jesus told on a journey, on a travel. And this is really cool. Now, I've got a little map for you. And last week we looked at what it was to be Samaritans, and we looked at some of the culture that was going on there. So if you missed that, as I say, please just jump online so you can catch some of that. But we looked a lot about the culture, what was going on in Samaria at the time. So they're on this journey, they're on this trip, and they're going to go from Galilee, which is this light sort of creamy bit here. And they're not these colors nowadays, by the way. So if you go over to modern day Israel and you say, I want to head to the creamy bit and then the little blue bit, no one's going to know what you're talking about. But anyway, so the creamy bit at the top is Galilee. And then Jerusalem is down here. You can see Jerusalem is down here. And then there's this blue bit right in the middle, which is Samaria. There's two ways to get from Galilee to Jerusalem. You could either cross the river and then cross back, so you could avoid the whole little blue bit, which we talked a little bit about last week. Or you could do what Jesus did, which is Jesus went straight through the middle of the place. And in between Galilee and Jerusalem, you have this place called Samaria. And Jesus led them straight into Samaria. They weren't friends. Remember we talked about last week. Samaritans and Jews weren't really they weren't the best of buddies, okay? They didn't really get on with each other. It wasn't full out enemies, but it was just animosity, okay? Now, just to show you don't take my word for it, I'm going to quote somebody who was a historian at the time. This is a guy named Josephus, and he writes this about an experience with Samaritans and Jewish people. This is not in the Bible. And this guy, Josephus, is not even a Jesus follower. He's a historian writing about experiences from the first century, because that's when he was around. And he writes about this episode here. It's in his book called The Antiquities, and it records an episode between some Jews and Samaritans. And Samaritans attacked a group of Galilean people who were traveling down to Jerusalem for one of the festivals, because they had to go to the temple. Temple was in Jerusalem. They had to go all the way down south. A group of Galilean pilgrims were on the way to Jerusalem, and they get attacked. And in retaliation, a group of Galileans formed like a little guerrilla army, and they said, hey, we're not having any of this. And they went back up into Samaria, these group of people that were like, yeah, you want some of this? I'm going to give you some of that, right? Because you've probably seen this kind of thing happen if you've been around long enough. This is what people do. You pick on them, you're going to mess with us, you're going to mess with me. So a whole group of them go back up, and they attack a Samaritan village. Not recorded in the Bible, recorded by a guy named Josephus, who was a historian, writing about experiences that took place at the same time. So here, just a little bit of context, again, just talking about some stuff so you can know there's some other sources out there as well. So if you're exploring faith and you're wondering about what this whole stuff, if it's even true or not, maybe this will help you. Maybe this will help you in your journey as you explore and think about things. So, moving on. Just before Jesus starts his travel, he tells his followers, 2 times it's recorded in the book of Luke, it's in Luke chapter 9, he basically says this: I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to get beaten up. I'm going to get put to death. But 3 days later, I'm going to come back. And then Luke adds this little following statement, which is nobody knew what in the world he was talking about. Because if anybody told you something like that, you would think they're loony as well, right? And you would be like, yeah, Jesus. Woo-hoo. Yeah. Okay? Luke tells us nobody believed him, okay? Which in and of itself is a pretty good sign for... Anyway, the dude predicts his own death, resurrection, which is pretty crazy. But anyway, he tells them just before they start this journey 2 times, I'm going to get arrested and killed and put to death. And now they're on this journey to Jerusalem. And instead of going around, he goes straight through the middle. And it's kind of like, well, here we have this journey through this territory that you don't normally go through or mustn't always choose to go through. And it's like Jesus is preparing them for the next thing that's to come. You know, this journey takes a few days to go on this journey, to go on this walk. It takes a few days. And Luke records the whole journey for us. And Jesus is kind of getting near the end of his life, yet Luke gives 10 chapters of his entire book to this journey. They must have thought it was a really important bit to include. And in this section of the book, there's 10 stories that Jesus told that aren't found in any of the other 3 books. So the 3 other biographies, Matthew, Mark, and John, there's 10 stories that Jesus told that are only found in this section of Luke. Luke's the only one who recorded them. You might have heard of one called The Prodigal Son. Pretty well-known story about a boy that ran away and the dad that welcomed him back, even though the kid said, I want nothing to do with you. You might have heard of that story. You might have heard about that story where somebody lost a coin and they did everything they could to find the coin, or a shepherd who had some sheep and did everything they could to find the sheep. Those stories are only found in the book of Luke and only in this section. So for some reason, it was really, really, really important for him to include this stuff. And it's because, I think, Luke wants you to know that you can believe what you read is true. This is Jesus, the everyday, ordinary guy, spending time with everyday, ordinary people. Sometimes we think Jesus is just about the birth and the miracles and then the death and the cross. But Luke actually gives us a more fuller picture of the life of Jesus. Luke wants you to know that what you believe is true. He's an investigative journalist. He's not going to leave bits out. So this is really helpful context. And I know it's a really long introduction, but as they're going through Samaria and as they're walking, there's quite a crowd that begins to gather, which is understandable. People have heard who he is. They recognize, hey, that's Jesus. That's the guy that's confusing. No, hey, that's Jesus. Hey. So, the crowd starts to follow him and you get an idea. There's people are gathering and walking through an area with different people who have different belief systems and different outlooks on the world and different approaches to life. And he's walking through this space. And in that place where things are different, Jesus finds similarities. And he does it through stories. You see, here's the kind of stories that he tells. He tells stories about farmers and judges and victims, coins and sheep, sons and daughters, weddings, banquets, building barns, towers, going to war, a friend who wakes you in the night for some bread, crooks, beggars, figs, and manure. I bet you haven't heard a message about the parable of the manure before, so there you go. I bet you're going to look it up when you get home. In a place where everything is different, Jesus finds similarity. Because no matter where you are in life, you understand farmers, sheep, coins. He's talking to people that understand. He finds similarity. It's just like ordinary stuff. Everyday, ordinary things. And Jesus finds similarities. And the crazy thing is, most of these stories, they don't even seem religious. They're not even like his, be kind to others and, all of his good messagey stuff, It's just like ordinary stories about ordinary people. And the thing is, that's how Jesus speaks to people who have no idea who he is. Because he doesn't bamboozle you with religious language. And it's time for the church to stop using religious language, because Jesus doesn't meet people with religious language. He meets people with ordinary language. Simple language. Everyday stuff. Everyday stuff. That's how Jesus meets people. And if we want to reach people who aren't followers of Jesus, we need to drop the Sunday morning talk. Okay, because we are so confusing sometimes. Don't you think Christians are kind of weird? Sometimes Christians can sort of talk Christian-y stuff. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, this is really cool, because you get to just sit here and giggle and watch while all the Christians get told off for a moment. But anyway, no, if we're a follower of Jesus, we've got to drop all the religious churchy stuff. Because Jesus didn't speak in religious, churchy language to people who had no idea who he was. He met people where they were. And in a world full of differences, because our world is so polarized now, we find so many ways to say this person's that and that person's this, and we categorize and push people into all separate types of boxes. And in a world full of categorization, Jesus finds similarity. And we've got to learn to find language that builds bridges and not separates again. We have to. And the crazy thing is, Jesus just told these people, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. And you'd almost be, it'd be understandable if Jesus got a load more intense. He's just told these guys, I'm going to die. I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to get killed. I'm going to get put to death. This is the end. This is going to be our last trip together, boys. Our last trip. I don't know, what are you going to do? If you know you're on your last leg of life, if you've got not long to live, what would you do? You might go into overdrive or super intensity, try to get a lot of stuff done. And Jesus kind of does the opposite. He just chills out, man. He just tells story after story. And he doesn't do any preaching at people. He doesn't do any, the window's closing, you've only got a few more days to be with me before it's all going to hit the fan and everything's going to change. And he doesn't grab them by the neck, and he doesn't grab them and just be wake up, come on. He doesn't get more intense. Jesus actually gets less intense. And that's an interesting aspect for us as well. Sometimes when we sometimes try to get super intense, and we don't need to. Jesus just journeys with these people, and it's crazy. But here's why it's so important. Because people never become a cause. They always stayed as people for Jesus. He never depersonalized his mission. The mission was never depersonalized. It was always relational. And the way you build friends and the way you make relationships is you have ordinary conversations with people. You have ordinary experiences with people, and you talk about ordinary stuff like farmers and sheep and, goodness gracious, the manure that I use in my garden. That's the kind of thing that Jesus does to help reach people who have no idea who he is or what he's like. And all of this is a great introduction to the story. And you might have heard this story before as well. It's in Luke chapter 10. And it starts out like this. It says, there's an expert in the law, and he has a question for Jesus. Stands up to test Jesus, and he says, Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus sort of does that thing, which he did a lot, which was he answered a question with a question, which was, what's written in the law? And then this expert says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, that's correct. Well done. Do this, and you will live. And then the man sort of thinking, it says he looks for a loophole, and he says, but just how would you define neighbor? And this is when Jesus responds with a story. He says, there's this man who's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, And on the way, he gets attacked by some robbers, and they beat him up, and they take his clothes, they leave him for dead. Luckily for him, there was a priest who was also going down this same road. But the priest saw him and went, crossed over. Then a Levite came along that same way, but he crossed over to the other side of the road as well. He wanted to avoid the injured man. Then a Samaritan came along. And when he saw the man, his heart went out to him, and he went to him. He gave him first aid, he cleaned him up, he bandaged his wounds. He lifted the man, he put him onto his donkey, he took him to an inn, and he made him comfortable. And in the morning, he took 2 silver coins, he gives it to the innkeeper, and he says, look after him. And if it costs any more than this, put it on my bill. And when I come back, when I'm passing this way again on my return journey, I will pay whatever is owed for this person. And Jesus then asks a question to the man that was originally questioning him, which is, so what do you think? Which one of the 3 became a neighbor to the man who was attacked? The one who treated him kindly, the man replied. And Jesus says, go and do the same. I told you at the beginning, we're going to get to a point where Jesus tells somebody to do something, and they didn't really want to be told to do that. And now Jesus says, go and do the same. So let's look a little bit into this story, figure out what's going on. When it says like an expert in the law, it's not like corporate law, commercial law, criminal law. It's not like law that we have nowadays. It's more accurately to understand it like the biblical law, the religious law. So this was a guy who was like a professor. He was like a biblical scholar sort of thing. That would be sort of our equivalent. He was trained in making sure that people followed the religious law properly and appropriately. That's what he gets God's law, if you like. And when you are in an area where you've got people who, like the Samaritans, have mixed beliefs and mixed ideas, we have to have religious police, don't we? We've got to make sure people are doing it the right way. So this guy's kind of like a religious guard to make sure that people aren't making mistakes that they shouldn't be making, or doing things that they shouldn't be doing, or he's basically making sure that we all stay doing the right thing according to God's law. For the Jewish people, the law for the Jewish people was the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those first 5 books are where they've got their law from, and this is what it refers to. So he's got to make sure that they do everything appropriately. And when it says he's testing Jesus, there's no implication there that he's like trying to necessarily catch him out. It's more like he's just checking out, is this guy for real? Because he's got to make sure, as the religious police, the religious guard, what's going on. Yeah? And I've heard some stories about this fella. I've heard some of the things that he's been doing. Let's just have a conversation and find out if this guy is for real. So let's start at the basics, which every good follower of the Jewish law should know. What's the most important command? What are the things that we should be doing? And he asks it in a disarming way, which is kind of like, instead of it being like, hey, you tell me what the main things are, he says it like this. He's like, what should I do to inherit eternal life? You see, he's clearly skilled in the conversation here, right? This guy knows what he's doing. What should I do to inherit eternal life? He sort of comes with that feigned submission to somebody else giving him input, right? And this is the way this conversation is going, because really it feels like he's trying to figure out, is this for real? And some of us, that's where we start with our faith. We sort of hear some stuff about Jesus. We hear some things that he might have done. We've seen people's lives, friends, family members, etc., colleagues. And then we kind of think, I don't know. And maybe you come to that place where you're sort of thinking, I'm just going to check out, is this for real? It's a pretty good place to be in. Really good place to be in. And Jesus then kind of levels the playing field because he says, well, what do you think? What do you read in the law that tells us this? Jesus sort of levels it out a bit. Instead of like the expert quizzing Jesus, it's like it's two people having this conversation. You see the dynamics of the dialogue here. They're sort of having this conversation together. What do you think? And they don't feel uncomfortable. It feels like they're just having this little conversation together. That's the sort of context of what's going on. And then he realizes, well, hang on a minute. I was the one trying to check out if everything about you is legit. And so now he starts to feel a little uncomfortable. So he looks for a loophole in the answer, which is, so how would you define, or what is a neighbor? Let's get into the nitty-gritty now. What's a neighbor? So he sort of pushes it back on to Jesus. And maybe he's the kind of person that wanted to ensure things stayed in control. I don't know. We're kind of reading into that. We don't know. Maybe he wanted everything to be fixed and measured. This is how you do things. This is the way they should be done. This is the way they've always been done. Maybe that's the kind of person he is. I don't know. These are the rules you must follow. We don't know. But all of a sudden, it feels like his heart's being examined. And so he pushes it back to Jesus because he's like, okay, you tell me, how do we define a neighbor? You see? And this is all taking place in a group of people, in front of people. Now, maybe that's happened in your life. Maybe you stand there on the sidelines and you're kind of thinking, I'm going to check out, is this stuff real about Jesus? Is this stuff true? Is this legit? Is this... And then as you sort of make some questions, and you might ask some questions and begin to explore some things, there comes a point when all of a sudden you feel awkward in your own heart because instead of you just examining Jesus, all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, well now he's examining me. He's kind of like, I'm sort of being asked about my motives. Something in me is kind of like, okay, no, I was here to find out if you're real, and now you're trying to ask me where my heart's at. This happens for all of us. Everyone in this room, this has happened for us. Everyone, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, this is what we've all done. We've all observed at a distance. We've all asked some questions. You begin to find something out, and then there reaches this point in your life where as you're exploring about Jesus, all of a sudden it's like he's examining you. You're not examining him anymore. And something in your heart is like, whoa, okay. I'm just reassuring you that that's normal, okay? If you're in that place today, that's totally normal. Join the club. We always think we're investigating Jesus to discover that he investigates what's going on in our hearts. And this is what's going on in this story. This is how this situation is shifted. And all of this happens in a Samaritan town, in front of Samaritan people, with a crowd of people that are following him. It's a story about a Jewish road that they all know about. There's this Jewish road. It's a real road. It's still there today. It's about 17 miles from Jerusalem to Jericho. It goes through a canyon. It was notorious for people being robbed on the way. They know about this place. He's talking about a real place and a real experience. And the thing is, Jesus is telling a story to a good Jewish man. So this guy asking the questions in that culture is a good Jewish man. Yeah, he's got status. He's got kudos. He's a leader in that community. He's a good man. People look up to him. He's a good guy. He's the one that ensures things are done correctly. And Jesus tells this story about this man walking this dangerous road that he gets beaten and attacked and everything. We just read about it. And then, oh, cool, a priest is coming by. But a priest sees the body, and the priest is like, and the priest crosses to the other side of the road. And a bit later, a Levite comes along. Now, Levite was somebody who worked in the temple as well, somebody who also worked in the religious system, so he would have worked in the temple. And he sees this person on the road, and he's like, and he crosses over to the other side of the road as well. So the religious scholar, the priest, and the Levite are all people of status. They're good people. All three of them are good people in that culture, in that community, in that day and age. They're people that you looked up to. These people had made it, and they got the best jobs and the best fields, okay? They're all up there. And They knew, because the religious people, and you might know this already, so sorry if I'm telling you something you already know. All three of those people would know the rules, wouldn't they? The scholar, the priest, the Levite, all of them know the rules. And everybody knows one of the most basic, one of the most common, one of the most widely known rules is you don't touch a dead body. And God forbid that you get blood on you. They all know the rules. You just don't touch a dead person. And the priest and the Levite, if they went over to that man on the ground, they would run the risk of becoming unclean and being defiled. And the highest, the worst thing, the highest form of uncleanliness was if you touched a dead body. Even, you can look it up even now. Just search corpse uncleanliness. It's the highest uncleanliness in that system. And a priest wasn't even allowed to go within 6 feet of a grave for risk of being contaminated. So that's 2 meters distance. If you don't know what that is, I don't know where you've been for the last 2 years. So it's about the length of a cow, right? You gotta keep some distance from people. So a priest couldn't even walk over an unmarked grave. So for a priest, he always had to make sure he was walking along good Jewish roads and making sure that there's nobody buried underneath there. Because if by chance he happened to walk over the grave of somebody, he would then be deemed as unclean. Okay, this is how serious it was. They did not want to run the risk, and if they would just be so embarrassing. I mean, you're the priest, this is your job, and you accidentally touch some dead person, you're totally ritually unclean, and to become clean again, it's costly and it takes time. You got to kill a cow, you got to burn it down to ashes. It takes 7 days before you're ritually clean again. They had a lot of stuff going on, and they still do in some cultures, that blood is an unclean thing. It is. And this is why they crossed over to avoid the injured person. And everybody hearing that story, nobody is shocked. Nobody is shocked that the priest and the Levite crossed the road. Because everybody is thinking, that's the same thing that I would do. Of course. Duh. Because Jesus is telling a story to a religious scholar about a priest and a Levite, 3 good people who all knew the rules, all knew the way you're supposed to do things. And then he introduces a Samaritan into the story. He's also traveling the same road. To all of the good people hearing the story, they know that the Samaritan is the bad guy. I mean, it's so obvious. The way Jesus tells the story, the way he sets it up, it's just so obvious. You've got all the good people, so these are the guys that wear the white hats. If you've ever seen a Western film, the white hat person is always a good guy. And then this is the guy with the black cowboy hat. The Samaritan's wearing a black cowboy hat, yeah? So he's the guy, he's the bad guy, right? And Jesus introduces the Samaritan into the story. And Samaritan is somebody that if you were one of the good Jewish people listening to the story, you're like, yeah, well, I'd avoid him as well. And that would be totally fine and totally normal and totally okay, because everything in your culture has told you that that's okay. That's a fine way to behave, and you can do that for as long as you like, because we've been doing it for as long as we can remember. It's okay to treat other people this way. But the Samaritan does the unexpected. He sees a need. It breaks his heart. He gets down off of his donkey. He allows his journey to be interrupted. He allows himself to go over. He doesn't even know what state this person is in. He goes over, he cares for this person, he cleans this person, he lifts this person up, he uses his own strength, his own resources, he takes him to an inn, he pays for him. Can you just get the idea? Jesus is laying on so thick here. Yeah, how could you paint a more opposite story if you want to analyze it from an English literature point of view? Priest looks, walks away. Samaritan jumps down, gets on his hands and knees, starts cleaning the body, cleaning up the wounds, bandaging him, picking him up, lifting him up, putting him on the donkey. Do you see how Jesus is like really laying it on here? Takes him to the end. He says, it makes him comfortable. Then he gets his own money. I mean, like, how much more can this guy do? Oh, and by the way, if it costs anything extra, I'm going to pay it. Add it to my bill. I'm going to pay it on the way back. You can almost feel the sarcasm in Jesus' everyday, ordinary story to everyday, ordinary people. Can you feel it? Can you see what's going on here? He's like painting this like really exaggerated picture. And the Samaritan allows himself to just, and it's not even like this sort of like, I'll have sympathy for you. I'll think about you. It's like an interruptive type of care. It's like he just gets stuck in kind of care. He gets his hands dirty. And Jesus wraps up the story with that final question to the scholar. What do you think? Which one of these three became a neighbor? And the man who treated him kindly was the reply. And Jesus answers, go and do the same. I added that bit at the bottom in case you missed it the first time round. This is what Jesus tells the guy, the good guy. Go and do the same as the Samaritan. Jesus has laid it on really, like, cleverly, huh? See, nobody was shocked when the priest and the Levite avoided the body, but everybody would be shocked that it's the Samaritan who you are supposed to be like. Not just like, oh, didn't he do a nice thing? Jesus didn't just say, he did some really cool stuff. Top marks. Well done, bud. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus was like, go and do the same. Do the same. Do the same thing that he did. Now, your brain's got to be going 1,000 miles an hour if you're one of those people that lived at that time thinking about all the rules that this other dude broke to care for somebody. Wow, but wait a minute. I thought God's law was like, these first 5 books, and I thought God's law was something, I thought we had to follow different types. I mean, where's this going to go? And Jesus is saying, do the same as the Samaritan. Jesus is now lifting up the Samaritan as the model of good behavior. It's crazy. It's such a shocking story. And then the other thing is, Jesus isn't just like, hey, go home and think about it. Just have a little just consider it. I want you to go home and I want you to consider it. No, Jesus is like full on telling him what to do. It's a command. Go and do the same. Man, he's just like, and I don't know how you feel when someone tells you what to do. But it might have been a bit like how that guy was feeling at that point. I just came to ask you some questions, and now you're just like, go and do the same. It's so clear. And it's not a morality lesson. It's not just a good thing. Oh, yeah, that's a really nice story. It's not a morality lesson. Because as soon as Jesus says, go and do the same, it's no longer a story. It's actually a command to change the way you live your life. It wasn't just think about it, this is a nice thing to consider. It was so much more than just a lesson on morality and how you treat people. This was about changing the way you live in your heart. And Eugene Peterson writes it like this. He says, at this point, there's no more questions. There's no more answers. No more detached discussions using religion to avoid the actual men and women in our lives. Because the thing that kept the priest and the Levite and the scholar away from people in their life was good religion and good religious words and good religious behavior that kept them away from one another. And Eugene Peterson writes, Jesus at this point just blows the whole thing up, and he says, it's time for no more questions, no more answers, and no more detached discussions using religion to avoid the actual men and women in our lives. It's kind of crazy. I mean, Jesus gives us this just blunt command. And the instruction clearly is not just for this guy. Remember, Jesus is walking with a group of people, and he told them, when we reach Jerusalem, I'm going to be put to death. My time with you is coming to an end. It's like Jesus wants people to know how you live in the in-between times. It's like he wants to equip his followers to know, hey, this is how you live. These stories all throughout this journey with Luke is all about the heart of God, and it's just incredible. And when you read it or reread it again through that lens that Jesus, the last stories maybe that Jesus is telling to people, they take on a whole different meaning. And the thing is, these followers will never forget that story. That's why Jesus told stories. Because they sink into your heart, they get into your head, they just kind of fester there. And Jesus is like, go and do the same. It wasn't just for that scholar, it was for us as well. And I know I don't like being told what to do, and you probably don't like being told what to do either. Maybe you like to prefer to keep yourself clean or keep up appearances, follow the letter of the law or whatever, prove to everybody else that you're holy. Maybe you'd rather avoid those people that are a little bit awkward, or maybe avoid those situations which cost you, maybe would be embarrassing, would run the risk of ruining your great reputation. Because that's what would have happened for all these other people. Or maybe we want to avoid those situations that just interrupt our own personal agenda. Because that Samaritan was going somewhere, he clearly had somewhere to be, but he allowed his own personal agenda to be interrupted. Maybe we'd rather live by the rules in our society, the rules in our culture. The unspoken rules, these kind of rules. The rules that say it's okay for me to actually, in certain circles, just talk down about people that are in council houses, or on benefits, or single moms, or people that are addicts, or people that have different sexual persuasions than myself. Certain circles that we're allowed to talk down about other people. And it's okay, isn't it? We can talk down about certain families who seem to not really keep very good control of their children. We're allowed to do that. Oh, she just sleeps around. Oh, he's like this and he's like that. It's okay, isn't it? And maybe even it's okay to talk down about people who have a different kind of job than you. And maybe it's done in just a jokey way, they really wouldn't understand because they've not been to the Caribbean like me. Oh, I don't know, whatever. Yeah. We have circles of society where our culture gives us rules, and they say that these rules are okay, and it's okay to talk down about people and make people into objects and make people into categories and make people into things and make people walk around as if they're carrying these huge suitcases in a big trail behind them, and it says divorcee, widow, infidelity, adulteress, whatever. We have these people that we somehow label with these things that are like cabooses on a train that follow them around everywhere they go. Because we categorize and we push people into these boxes. And you know what? It's okay for you to do it because nobody tells you not to do it at school, and nobody tells you not to do it at college, and nobody tells you not to do it in your workplace. And sometimes they don't even tell you not to do it in church. And sometimes people even laugh along with you at the jokes you make about people. Because it's okay, because it's how we've always done it. And every good Jewish boy knows that you would not go near a dead body. And every good Jewish girl knows that you would not cross to the other side of the road. God forbid that you would ever put yourself in an embarrassing or awkward or uncomfortable situation. Because that's okay. Because we've been doing it this way for centuries. And Jesus, tells us off. He says, stop. Stop. We have to stop going along with rules in our culture that are not the rules of God. They're not the rules of God. Remember the context of this story? It was all about the law. What's the most important thing? What's the greatest commandment? What should I do to inherit eternal life? Which sounds like a really good question. The whole filter of this story is about the rules, the right things to do, the right law. And followers of Jesus should follow a totally higher law, a higher way of living and loving, a higher way of treating people. And we live by a rule that is not determined by society. It is not determined by popular culture. It is not determined by our own prejudices or biases. It is not determined by our own comfortabilities. This rule that we now live by, and if you're a follower of Jesus, this is the rule that we now live by. If you're not a follower of Jesus, that's okay. You can just, like I said before, you can giggle and laugh while the person sitting next to you squirms a bit because Jesus is telling us how to do things. We live by a rule which is driven by loving God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength, and loving others as myself. We would end racism if we actually started loving others as I loved myself, because there's no hierarchy in loving someone else the way I love myself. If I treat others the way I love myself, it's a level playing field, and it's time for followers of Jesus to level the playing field. We don't have to deal with issues, we just have to love the way he told us to love. We level the playing field in every situation. There's no hierarchy or superiority. We level the playing field. We are all, yeah. And it's just a challenge. It's an awkward challenge, isn't it? So what are we going to do about it? Because hostility is cheaper than hospitality. And indifference is easier than involvement. Hostility, is cheaper than hospitality. It cost that Samaritan something to do something for somebody else. It's easier to just be hostile in your heart because it doesn't cost you a thing. And indifference is easier than involvement because it's so much easier to just ignore and be indifferent rather than to get yourself involved. In this whole series, we've been looking at get stuck in. That followers of Jesus are those that learn to get their hands stuck in. We stop being afraid. We get stuck in. We get stuck in. And I just wonder as we wrap up this whole series, and it's going to be a bit like telling you what to do and telling us what to do, but I wonder what our default position is. Is our default position to look the other way, to walk to the other side? Or is our default position to see the need and do something about it? What do we do? Do we avoid because we're afraid of contamination? Jesus wasn't. Or do we get involved? And I wonder what you see on your everyday, ordinary road. This was an everyday, ordinary road with everyday, ordinary people. This isn't a Sunday morning setting for these people. This is an everyday, ordinary road. So just take a moment and think about what's your everyday, ordinary road. Is it your workplace tomorrow? Is it your college? Is it your school? What's your everyday ordinary road? Are you retired? Is it with your neighbors? Is it an activity that you've got going on? You're going to a parents' club, you going into a workplace. What's your everyday ordinary road? Because this is an everyday ordinary road type of story. Where are we in our everyday ordinary roads? And who do we encounter in our everyday ordinary roads? Who we don't preach at, but we find common ground. We find language and stories that build bridges, not separate and push people away. What do we have in our everyday ordinary road? And I wonder too, as well, sometimes we can do this as followers of Jesus. We can see that situation and we can be like, God, you meet that need. Oh, you help that person. You make something happen, which is just a really nice spiritual way of taking no responsibility. We do this sometimes. Because sometimes we expect a supernatural encounter when Jesus is looking down and he's just like, what? You do something about it. Let's not spiritualize avoiding people by saying, I'm waiting for God to do his miracle and provide for that person. That doesn't really help. Someone told me once, it doesn't help a drowning person to stand on the side of the shore and just pray for them. What would help a drowning person is to throw them a lifeboat, right? Throw them a flotation device. That's what would be helpful. Not standing on the sideline fasting and praying for a miracle to happen when the need is in front of you and you can do something about it. Because we're supposed to go and do the same. And I know we don't like being told what to do, so you can all send me angry emails this afternoon. Just kidding. But we're going to wrap up today. We're going to come to land here. And it's just going to be a really, really sort of direct question for us as we get ready to close. And it's this. Which direction will you cross the road? At the end of the day, it's a personal choice. We're doing it together. We're supporting community. But where the rubber hits the road is in your own heart. Which direction are you going to cross the road? In your everyday, ordinary life, and you see something, are you going to walk away to avoid or walk towards and engage? One way is so much easier and so much tidier, and another way could be costly, and it could be embarrassing, and it could be risky. But which way will you cross the road? So let's pray. God, we thank you so much for who you are. God, we thank you that we have like a book by Luke where he just writes about you and he writes some experiences. It's so great that we have these recorded. We're so grateful for the detail he went in and the stuff that he did. Thank you. We thank you that we can also ask you questions, that we can learn and discover more about what you're like. And I pray for anyone here this morning who's still on their own journey of discovering what it means to follow you. I just pray that this morning has been helpful. God, that they'll remember things about what it is that you're like and what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And then, Father, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we just ask that you would forgive us for all the times when we've chosen to stay away rather than to engage. Well, God, help us. Help us as our everyday, ordinary journeys to be witnesses, to be what you're like. And God, that whoever we encounter on our path, help us to do the same as the Samaritan. Help us learn to do that which isn't driven by culture or perception or the rules of society, but that we would learn to do the same as what the Samaritan did. God, thank you so much that you are with us, you're helping us, you're guiding us, and you're equipping us. And I thank you that you are gracious, Because if we're honest, we've all made mistakes and we've all avoided people when we'd rather avoided them. And I thank you that you forgive us. And I thank you that you extend grace. And instead of berating us, you encourage us to find another law to live by. And for those of us who are Jesus followers, we commit to love you with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our strength. And we commit to love our neighbors as ourselves. In your name we pray. Amen. Have an incredible week, whatever you got going on, when your everyday, ordinary experiences, your everyday, ordinary roads. Have an amazing, exciting, and incredible week. And we will be here next Sunday for our vision morning. Totally looking forward to it. We've got a whole team of people doing a bunch of stuff. So, make it a priority to be here if you can. Thank you.
What if it's time to stop watching from the sidelines and time to get stuck